Chapter 1. A New Beginning. The rain poured relentlessly over the streets of New Jersey, its rhythm a quiet companion to Rose's turbulent thoughts. She sat on the edge of a worn couch in their small, dimly lit apartment, her gaze fixed on the window. Outside, the world carried on, indifferent to her struggles. Inside, it was just her and her daughters, Alice and Alex. Alice, the elder twin, was quietly scribbling in a notebook at the kitchen table, her dark curls bouncing slightly every time she leaned forward. Alex, always the more restless one, sat on the floor, her face scrunched in frustration as she tried to solve a jigsaw puzzle. Rose watched them, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. They were her everything, her reason to keep going, even when it felt impossible. It had been 6 months since the divorce. 6 months of sleepless nights, stretched paychecks, and the suffocating weight of being both a mother and a provider. Rose had never imagined this life for herself. She had dreamed of a stable home, a loving partner, and a future filled with security for her girls. But dreams, she learned, could shatter like glass. Their apartment was modest, a far cry from the suburban house they once called home. The walls were a dull beige, and the furniture was second-hand, but Rose had done her best to make it feel warm. The girls' room was the brightest spot, painted lavender with hand-drawn stars and planets scattered across the walls. It was Alice and Alex's safe haven, a place where their imaginations could run wild, even as the reality outside their door remained harsh. "Mom, can we have pancakes for dinner?" Alex asked suddenly, her blue eyes wide with hope. Rose hesitated, glancing at the almost empty fridge. She had planned to stretch the last of their groceries until her next paycheck, but the look on Alex's face made her heart ache. "Of course, sweetheart," she said softly, standing up. As Rose began mixing the batter, Alice walked over, holding her notebook. "Mom, do you think we'll ever have a house again? Like the one we used to live in?" The question hit Rose like a punch to the stomach. She stirred the batter, trying to keep her hand steady. "I don't know, Alice," she admitted. "But I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure you and your sister have a good life. We'll get through this together." Alice nodded solemnly, her eyes too mature for her 10 years. Rose hated that they had to grow up so quickly. She wanted to shield them from the weight of the world, but the reality was, they were in this together. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rose sat at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of her. She buried her face in her hands, exhaustion and despair washing over her. But as tears threatened to fall, she reminded herself that she couldn't afford to break down. She looked over at a photo on the wall, her and the girls at the beach, taken just a year ago. Back then, life seemed perfect. But perfection was an illusion, she realized now. Life was messy, unpredictable, and often unfair. Rose took a deep breath and picked up her pen. Tomorrow, she would apply for more jobs, look for ways to cut costs, and figure out how to keep moving forward. She didn't have all the answers, but she had determination. And for Alice and Alex, that would have to be enough. As the rain continued to fall outside, Rose whispered a silent promise to herself and her daughters. "We'll make it through this storm." Chapter 2. A test of strength. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of their apartment, casting soft rays over the cramped living room. Rose was already up, sipping her second cup of coffee as she scanned job listings on her old laptop. The screen flickered occasionally, a reminder of how many years it had served her. She was determined to find a better-paying job, something that would allow her to give Alice and Alex the stability they deserved. "Mom, I can't find my other shoe." Alex's voice rang out from the bedroom, followed by the sound of drawers being hastily opened and closed. "Did you check under the bed?" Rose called back, her eyes never leaving the screen. "I already did." Rose sighed and stood, making her way to the girl's room. She found Alex kneeling on the floor, her blonde hair a tangled mess from sleep. Alice sat cross-legged on her bed, quietly reading a book, seemingly unfazed by the chaos. "Here it is," Rose said, pulling the missing shoe out from behind the door. Alex grinned sheepishly. "Thanks, Mom." "Brush your hair before we leave," Rose reminded her. Once the girls were ready, the three of them headed out. It was Saturday, which meant a trip to the community center. Rose had found an affordable art class for the girls, a small luxury she allowed herself, despite their tight budget. It was the one thing that brought them joy in these challenging times, and Rose was willing to make sacrifices to keep it going. The streets of Newark were bustling as usual. People hurried past them, some clutching cups of coffee, others engaged in animated conversations. Rose tightened her grip on the girl's hands, her protective instincts kicking in. When they reached the community center, Alice and Alex ran off to join their class, their laughter echoing through the hall. Rose lingered near the door for a moment, watching them with a mixture of pride and longing. She wished she could give them more opportunities, more freedom, more of everything. As she waited for the class to end, Rose decided to walk to the nearby library. It had become her sanctuary, a place where she could think, plan, and occasionally escape into the pages of a novel. She browsed the aisles, her fingers skimming the spines of books, until she found one about single mothers overcoming adversity. She smiled faintly, tucking it under her arm. Back at the community center, Rose noticed a man talking to Alice and Alex as they showed him their paintings. He was tall, with dark hair and a kind face. Rose approached cautiously, her guard up. "Hi, I'm Mark," he said, noticing her. "I teach the creative writing class here. Your daughters were telling me about their stories. They're very talented." Rose nodded politely. "Thank you. They've always had a knack for creativity." "You must be very proud," he said with a warm smile. "I am," Rose replied, though she kept her tone measured. She wasn't ready to let her guard down, especially with someone new. That evening, as they walked home, Alex tugged at Rose's sleeve. "Mom, Mr. Mark said we could join his writing class if we want. Can we?" Rose hesitated. The art class was already stretching their budget, and she wasn't sure if she could afford another activity. But the excitement in her daughter's eyes was impossible to ignore. "I'll think about it," she said finally. When they reached the apartment, Rose prepared a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. As they ate, Alice began talking about the stories she wanted to write, and Alex chimed in with her own ideas. For the first time in weeks, Rose felt a flicker of hope. That night, as the girls slept, Rose sat by the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. She opened the book she had borrowed from the library and began to read. Each page was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that other women had faced similar struggles and come out stronger. Rose made a silent vow to herself. No matter how hard things got, she would keep fighting for her daughters and for herself. They deserved a future filled with love and opportunity, and she would do whatever it took to make that a reality. Chapter 3. Rising from the ashes, winter had come to New Jersey, painting the streets in shades of white and gray. The apartment was colder than usual, the old radiator struggling to keep up. Rose wrapped a blanket around herself as she reviewed her budget for the 100th time that month. Bills were piling up again, and the thought of Christmas around the corner filled her with a bittersweet ache. "Mom, can we get a Christmas tree this year?" Alex asked, her hopeful eyes peeking over the edge of the couch. Rose forced a smile. "We'll see, sweetheart. Maybe something small." Alice, always the more perceptive one, stayed quiet, her nose buried in another book. Rose hated the look of disappointment in her daughter's eyes, but she was determined to turn things around. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A week earlier, she had applied for a position as an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit. She hadn't thought much of it. After all, she'd been rejected so many times before. But that morning, she received the call. "We'd like to offer you the position, Miss Carter," the voice on the other end had said. "It's part-time for now, but there's room to grow." Rose accepted immediately, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. On her first day at the job, Rose walked into the office with a mix of nerves and determination. The work was straightforward, organizing files, answering calls, and managing schedules. But Rose poured her heart into it. She stayed late when needed, learned quickly, and even began building a rapport with her co-workers. Her boss, a middle-aged woman named Sandra, took notice. "You've got a real knack for this," she told Rose one day. "I can see you moving up here if you're interested." Rose smiled, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. At home, things began to improve. With the extra income, Rose managed to buy a small artificial Christmas tree. She and the girls spent an evening decorating it with homemade ornaments. The sight of Alice and Alex laughing and stringing popcorn garlands filled Rose's heart with a joy she hadn't felt in years. "See, Mom, it's perfect," Alex said, stepping back to admire their work. "It is," Rose agreed, her voice thick with emotion. As the weeks passed, the girls flourished. They joined Mark's writing class, where they found a new outlet for their creativity. Mark often praised their stories, and Rose began to trust him more. She even found herself attending the occasional class to see their progress. One evening, after class, Mark approached Rose. "You know, you have incredible daughters. They remind me why I started teaching." Rose smiled. "Thank you. They're my whole world." "You've done an amazing job with them," he said sincerely. "I can only imagine how hard it's been." "It has," Rose admitted, "but they make it worth it." Mark nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "If you ever need help with anything, don't hesitate to ask." Rose wasn't sure how to respond, but something in his tone made her believe him. By spring, Rose's life had taken a turn for the better. She was offered a full-time position at the nonprofit, with benefits. The girls excelled in both their art and writing, and Rose even found herself reconnecting with old dreams. One day, while cleaning out a drawer, she found an old notebook filled with poems she had written years ago. Inspired by her daughters, she began writing again, this time about her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The girls surprised her on her birthday with a small gift, a framed picture they had drawn of the three of them standing under a bright sun. The words, "We did it together," were written across the top. Rose hung it on the wall right above her desk. It was a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they could go. As she tucked the girls into bed that night, Alex looked up at her. "Mom, are we going to be okay now?" Rose kissed her forehead and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay." Alice, half asleep, mumbled, "You're the best mom ever." Tears welled in Rose's eyes as she whispered, "And you're the best daughters I could ever ask for." As she sat by the window that night, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Rose allowed herself to dream again. They had weathered the storm, and while life would always have its challenges, she knew they could face them together. This was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning.